Hello, my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day, and welcome to this tutorial on creating Mally. This is the Mally Spencer doll from the book Mally the Maker and the Queen in the Quilt. And her new doll pattern includes the doll, instructions on making the doll, her t-shirt, and pants with real working pockets. So I decided to share a 3-part video series on how to do each step of this process. So in this video, we are going to learn how to sew Mally together. Now, one quick note, it would be valuable to go and watch the video on making Miss Bunny because the arms, legs, and body build is identical between the Miss Bunny doll pattern and the Mally doll pattern. So I definitely want you to go and see how to sew those arms and legs so that way you're caught up with me, and then we can get started working on Mally's face, attaching that to her body, and then finishing up with a big head of yarn hair. So let's get started. So let's begin first with Mally's face. I have punched holes in the fabric where her eyes are going to go, and I've already started stitching her nose and her mouth, and I am doing a simple running stitch. So I insert my needle and take a stitch forward from the front, then I take a stitch forward from the back. So inserting, I'm trying to make these stitches about roughly the same size, and then I stitch back into the hole that I did before. Yeah, I am using kind of a shiny, real nice needlepoint floss. This just happened to be the right thickness that I liked. And this is for 18 to 13 count needlepoint or 11 to 18 count cross stitch. This was just what I had on hand. You could also use 3 to 4 strands of regular embroidery floss. This is just the regular DMC embroidery floss. Okay, so I'm just going to take a few more stitches here and then tie off. And I always just start and end my stitching with an overhand knot. No need to get fancy. So just one more stitch here. That looks good. Cute little mouth for Mally, a little asymmetrical. I kind of like that. She's kind of half smiling. I like that. A little bit of a different smile than before. And then an overhand knot. Let's go over this. You're going to create a loop with the, get it up here so you can see. I'm going to create a loop with the needle passing on top of the yarn that's connected to the mouth, to the head. And then I'm going to take the needle and pass it underneath. That creates kind of a pencil looking shape. That is your overhand knot. Tighten that down to the surface. And this is pretty slippery thread, so I'm actually going to pass this through one stitch. Just go right through that stitch. Oops, I lost, yeah, it slipped right through the eye of the needle. Rethread this, and I'm going to pass the needle through that stitch, and then I'll clip it off because that's just going to hold it and lock it in place securely. And there we go. Cute Mally mouth, and definitely play with different expressions. If you want to experiment, give her a little half smile. You can even give her a little frown. That's just fine. Mally's not always happy in the book. All right, so now let's insert some safety eyes. This is just a pack that I picked up on eBay, and it comes in lots of different sizes. And I've experimented with this. I think this Mally doll had the super big eyes, like the 12 millimeter, and you can see she looks, you know, very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And then this Mally had smaller eyes. I do believe that these were the 9 millimeter. Let me see if I can get her. There you go. You can see, yeah, 9 millimeter eyes. So that kind of gives her a different look. I would not advise mixing and matching, you know, 2 different sizes. I think that is going to be a guarantee for a kind of crazy looking, very confused looking Mally doll. So if your goal is that though, then using 2 different sizes of eyes would definitely give you that effect. So it's kind of like as I'm sharing this, I'm thinking of all the different ways I could mix it up and make a really crazy looking doll. And that always makes me kind of giggle. So I think I would go with these. These are the 10 millimeter eyes. I like that size. That looks good. And The reason why I advise using safety eyes rather than buttons is if you decide to give this doll to a child, it does really lock the eyes in place. They're not going to go anywhere, and there's no risk that a button pops off and gets eaten by somebody and then causes them to choke. So I really like these for that reason. All right, so I'm just going to insert the eye from the right side and push that through nicely. So it looks good. There we go. All of a sudden, Mally looks real. And then now I'm going to grab the backs, and it's just a plastic back that pops in place. And I did find that this was just a little bit tricky to get the hang of, popping this in place so that it locks securely. And I found the key was to use a spool of thread that has a small hole in it so I can put pressure. So let me grab a spool of thread. So this is what I'm looking for, a spool of thread that has a small hole in it. I line up that safety eye, so it's like this and kind of already pretty firmly seated there. And then I can just place this on top of that hole in the spool of thread and press down firmly. And that presses that plastic up into that safety eye. It's all locked together. There is no coming out. Yeah, it's impossible to remove it. So make sure that you pick the right eyes and you have it all lined up and you like how it looks before you do this step. So there we go. That is Mally's pretty face created. And now we need to talk about a few marks that we need on the fabric so that way we have guidelines for the future that are going to be really helpful for us later. So one thing are these side dots. These kind of come in about where you would think Mally has ears, and we want to be able to see those after the head is stitched together. So I'm going to just extend that in just a little bit of a line there, and that's going to help me whenever I sew on her hair. I'm going to know where to start and stop that piece of crown hair. I also really do like to have that center front marked right there, so that way I know where that is located. That's going to help me line up the head with the neck. Now let's take a look at the back head piece. Here we've got a little bit more of a marking. We've got this center line that we need marked, and I have marked this with water-soluble blue pen. This will come out. If you wash the doll, it'll come out completely. You could mark it, of course, with a ceramic marking pencil. This just erases off instead. Again, I have these side lines about where her ears are going to go, so if you don't mark the front, then you can always mark the back. And then I've also got the center front on the bottom marked as well. Okay, the side with the marks is the right side, and then of course the side with Mally's face is the right side. So we are going to place this right sides together and line this up nicely. And what we're going to do is take this to the machine. We're going to stitch starting over here with the edge of the neck, back stitch, stitch all around the head, come around and back stitch again. That's going to leave this edge open to attach the head to the neck of the doll. Okay, on my machine I have attached a patchwork foot. This is a very specific foot for my machine, and I'm going to change my stitch to dial that needle down so that it is over here on the side. So the machine that I'm using is a Janome 8200. This is a 9mm wide patchwork foot, and it has actually almost a zigzag opening. It's got quite a wide opening here, and that's going to allow me to zigzag with this foot, which I really, really like to be able to do, and also give me a very accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance from this edge. So this is a foot specific to this 9mm wide feed dog. The reason why I like it is because moving that needle over, you can see, and how wide the foot is, I'm actually have my foot on top of that right hand feed dog. Without it, it's a lot more challenging to piece because the fabric is not going to catch. If I have my needle in the center position, my fabric actually would not catch on a feed dog until it's far behind the foot. But I want you to understand that by dialing my needle over, and using this particular foot, I'm getting that accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've also lowered my stitch length to 1.5mm, so I'm going to get a really tight, tiny stitch. I am using white thread here, which doesn't match absolutely perfectly with the fabric. I want you to be able to see a little bit without making a ruined doll. When I use black, it really does not end up looking all that good. So bear with me, I'm going to be using white thread over this beige fabric. Now you might be wondering what this is. This is a Supreme slider. I place this over the machine bed just like this, just to even out. There's a lot of lumpy bumps here. You know, it's not perfectly smooth. And I like to just smooth that out so that as I take the pieces and feed them into the machine, they just slip and slide really easily in here. Not a requirement, but it definitely does make things feel easier. All right, so I'm going to put it so that the safety eyes and the face is face up, so that way they're not on the bottom and being kind of bulky and lumpy. And I'm just going to get started here, lining this up nicely. Lift the foot. I do have a knee lifter on this machine, so I can lift the foot with my knee. Take 3 stitches, hold down my back stitch button, take 3 more stitches back, and then now I can get going. So I'm just going to align the edges of the head. This is not difficult fitting. They're the exact same size and shape pieces, so this should go together really smoothly. You know, the biggest thing is just stop often, lift your foot slightly, and rotate the piece around. You are stitching a circle, and if you just pedal to the metal with this, it's really easy to get your seam allowance off, because sewing machines like to stitch in straight lines. They really, really do. So by stopping, lifting, rotating, you just get your mind into that program of, I'm stitching a circle, I need to stop and rotate the pieces ever so slightly as I go. And that is going to ensure that you maintain that perfect seam allowance, 1/4 inch all the way around. And I'm just keeping those pieces lined up with the edge of that foot, just exactly right. And then, of course, if you want to really just make sure that you're lining up correctly, make sure that those marks are aligning as you go, that's nice. But it should be lining up just exactly right, because as I said, these 2 pieces are the same size and shape. There's no difference there. You're not trying to fit something together. The head of Mally is actually much, much easier to sew than the head of Miss Bunny. So it's really funny. Mally, the doll Mally, is actually an easier doll to sew than Miss Bunny, but the clothing for Mally is going to be a lot harder. So put in a little bit of challenge there, and that's what makes it fun. Okay, I'm going to back stitch again. And then I'm going to stitch onto a scrap charger. You might be wondering, what are these little pieces of fabric I've got floating around here? This just basically keeps my machine in stitching mode. I lift my foot a little bit, stitch into that, and I stop with my needle in the down position 1 or 2 stitches off that scrap. And that just keeps my machine in stitching mode. So I am ready to stitch the next thing, and it reduces the chance that my machine will gag. So there we go. That is Mally's head stitched. And you could probably turn this right side out and be more or less successful, but really the best way to turn this and have a really smooth edge for her head is to trim this seam allowance down a little bit. So I'm just going to take a pair of sharp scissors and I'm going to cut right through the middle of that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just trimming right through the middle there, not getting too close to that stitching. And what this does, seam allowance can get bulky whenever you are turning a circle to the inside. You have more fabric on that edge to the outside than you will to the inside, because obviously, you know, it's a circle. So whenever you turn that, then that seam allowance just kind of bunches up and gets lumpy, and that makes it not look as good. So by trimming it down, you reduce that bulk and just make it a little bit smoother, a little bit easier for that to, not lay flat is the wrong term, but just smooth out. We'll say that. That's a better term, smooth out. So there we go. We've got a pretty face. We've got our lines clearly marked on the back. That is how we're going to make the Mally head. Now, please refer to the other video that I did on making Miss Bunny so that you can see step by step how to make her limbs and get them to this state. You're going to need, obviously, 2 legs and do that little stitching across, so that way you create that cinched effect to create a knee. And go on ahead and also stuff these before you do that cinching, so that way they're fairly firm but not really, really hard and rigid. These are firm, they hold up their shape, but they are not so rigid that they are, you know, they feel painful to hug. You still want it to be kind of soft and cuddly. Same thing for her arms. I do tend to make the hands a little bit on the stiffer side, just simply so that they maintain nice shape. And then do not stuff the upper parts, because we will stuff that later. And there is a hole in each of these pieces to allow stuffing after we complete the doll, after we sew it all together. Okay, now let's talk about body prep. And again, you can watch this part of the tutorial for Ms. Bunny to see this step by step. So the front body doesn't really need much prep other than making sure to mark the lines that are going to indicate where you attach the legs and the arms. The back does require a little bit more effort. We have darts to stitch here and press those up, and then to stitch the 2 center back pieces together with that center seam, making sure to stitch that dot to dot, meaning that we leave this nice long opening in the back. Then I'm going to take the front to back and stitch those together at the shoulder seams, and I already trimmed those seams down to about 1/8 of an inch. So I just trim that shoulder seam down, and now this is ready to attach to the head. So I have the body, as you can see, this is wrong side out, all right? I'm going to take the head, and that is right side out. So don't get confused. We're going to take the head and we're going to insert it so we've got the right side of the body to the right side of the head. And here's how we check ourselves. I'm going to flip up the back. That's the back of Mally's body. That's the back of Mally's head. And that's the marking that I did for her hair. That's correct. And that should line up just like that. I'm going to grab a pen, and I'm going to pin this so that the pin is inserted so that the tip is just coming out a little bit, so that the bulk of the pin is down here. That's going to make this easier to stitch together, because this is it's a very tight space to stitch on a machine. I'll be honest. This might even be something that if you want to, you can hand stitch it. It's just a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that is absolutely open to you. All right, so I line up the other side. Again, flip up the body to check. This is Mally's body front. That is obviously the right side front of Mally's face. That looks correct. Flip that down, place a pin here. And then the shoulder seams, I just want to press one shoulder seam to one side, and then there's a seam inside for the head, that seam for the head, we're going to press that to the other side. So in that way, those 2 seams, it's like one is going this way and the other is going this way, and they're butting up together like that. And it's kind of a quilting term, you know, you're butting up your seams. So that works great for that. It also reduces bulk. If both the seam allowances are flowing in the same direction, then you end up with a pretty chunky spot. So both of them are going in opposite directions, and the same thing for this other shoulder seam. Press it so one seam's going in one direction, the other seam's going in the other direction. That looks great. All right, let's get this on the machine. First thing you want to do is take off your scrap charger and then have nice long thread tails so you're sure nothing's going to gag when you get started stitching. I like to set this up so that the body back is face up. And keep in mind that, you know, this is a pretty tight opening because we've got obviously a, you know, kind of bulky foot, and we've got these pins. So what I like to do is I'd like to just set up so that my foot and needle is going to land right in the center front of the head and body. Now I'm going to take 3 stitches forward. I'm going to take 2 stitches back. There we go. And it is going to literally be like 3 stitches at a time, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a rotate. And I'm sorry, my fingers are going to get in the way because this is just a tight space. So I take a few stitches and then I just grab the whole thing and rotate it forward a bit. There we go. And I'm just making sure I'm feeling those layers, making sure that they're staying in nice alignment. I take a few more stitches. and then I rotate it. I'm shifting the whole body as far forward as I can, with the foot still in place on top of those fabrics. So there we go, that looks good. And now I'm getting close to the shoulder seam, so I'm going to stitch right up to it, and then I'm going to stop, lift the foot, and smooth out those seams, making sure that I've got them going in the right directions, and I've not got any, I've not got any pleats or puckers or anything like that. So there we go, that looks good. Take another few stitches. You can reach in there and pull out that pin. That's helpful. Okay, now I'm going to pull forward again, smooth things out as much as I can. There we go, that looks good. And this is not difficult fitting. This is, I really aim to make my pieces as accurate as possible so that you're not going to be like force fitting, fighting it. One piece isn't fitting nicely to the other. I played with this and played with this and played with this enough to where these two things go together really accurately. Now watch out for those thread tails there. I had those long thread tails so the machine wouldn't gag, but now they're kind of getting in my way, so I'm going to clip those. There we go. And now I'm right at the center back. So I'm here at the center back. I can feel those seam allowances. It feels like everything's still in a nice alignment. Watch out for this. The seam allowances can sometimes catch on, this bulky spot around your needle, and that can, catch it and pull it up. So watch out for that. Reach in there and take out that pen. And then I've just got a little bit more to go, and you can see how I'm pulling that down. So I have a little smooth spot here with everything flat. It's literally like 3 to 5 stitches that I can take, and then I pull forward again, just like so. All right, coming up on that second shoulder seam. A few more stitches. I think the challenging thing is, a lot of times when we're sewing, we just, we get kind of used to everything just being flat all the time. And when we have a little tight space like this, and it just takes this patience, 5 stitches shift, 5 stitches shift, it just feels a little bit more challenging. But the nice thing is the head and the neck are the same size. So it's not like you're trying to, fit something in there and you're going to have extra fabric and possibly pleats or something like that. No, they really are the same size. So I'm just going to trim right through the middle of that seam allowance, reducing it in half. Again, it just reduces that bulk and makes it easier for that seam to smooth out. There we go. That looks great. And then turn that right side out. We can check ourselves. Nice and smooth seam, perfectly matching that seam between Mally's head and the shoulder. So that looks great. That one's just ever so slightly off, but it looks like it's smoothed out through that edge. That looks fine. And I'm going to just generally press that seam allowance down towards Mally's body. That's just fine. You can also press it up towards the doll. I'm just finger pressing inside that seam allowance. You can also press it up into the head. It's entirely up to you. So we are already ready to put our Mally doll together with her arms and legs attached to her body. So the first step is to turn Mally wrong side out. So I just turn her just like that, have her head all freaky and scary looking, wrong side out, like so. All right, now I'm going to place her arms. With Miss Bunny, I always think paws, but with Mally, I always think arms. Okay, so here we go. I like the thumb pointing up towards Mally's head. I'm going to line that up nicely, and I'm going to pen this just like so. And if you want to, and this definitely does help, go on ahead and baste stitch this in place. Just, a little line of stitching really helps to keep that from wiggling and shifting out of shape, out of position as you stitch around this. It does really make it easier. So I'm going to pin all of these in place, and then I'll baste stitch them before I do this final line around Mally's body. Okay, her second arm. Again, I have that thumb pointing up towards Mally's head. All right, so this is the really confusing part, and that is her leg. So I will be perfectly honest. I made 2 or 3 Mally dolls, actually Miss Bunny dolls, with the legs facing the wrong way before I finally figured out a good method. And that is, you take the leg and you have the front. This is the body front. It doesn't have the seam in the center. It's just the body front. And here you can see this is right, so that the leg is pointing up like you have feet, and there's the body front. And then you just flip it over. So there we go. They have the leg curling so that the toes of the foot are pointing down towards the table. That's the right way. I'm going to line that up and again place a pen. And, you know, just like I was saying before, if you really wanted to get creative, you could have one foot go one way and one foot go the other. There's a lot of ways that you can make some pretty funny dolls. Be creative, you know, and if you make a mistake with it, don't feel bad. It really is perfectly fine. And I don't think any kid that you give a doll to is going to mind that much. They might really enjoy a doll that has legs going in 2 different directions, really. So there we go. That is all pinned in place. And now I am going to just do a little basted stitch. Pull out my thread tails here. I like to do this. I find that sometimes, you know, the thread just likes to suck down in the machine. And if this is not really a convenient time to use a scrap charger, then I just make sure that I pull out nice long thread tails and then I hang on to them. I just hang on to that as I stitch down that line. And I'm not going to back stitch because this is really just a basting stitch, and I'm just stitching about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the fabric, not 1/4 inch because that stitching might end up showing in the finished doll. Just 1/8 of an inch line of stitching right there holding that in place. So there we go. We have our limbs basted in place. Don't necessarily have to do that, but I think it definitely makes the next step easier. Because this is going to get a little bit funny as we push the limbs, all of them, through that back opening. And we're doing this so that way we have the ability to bring the body front and back together. All of those edges that remain to be stitched need to be brought together. So here we go. And this might be a little bit of like shove the legs and arms in and then pull them out as much as you need to flatten this whole thing out. So there we go. That looks good. And flatten out that side. Bring those edges together. Flatten out the bottom of the legs. And just like I was talking about with the head, you know, these pieces are the same size so that they should fit together nicely. So one place that we can pin and kind of check ourselves is the fold in the body front to the seam line in the body back. We can pin that and lock those 2 pieces together right there. So I'm going to grab a pin. Place a pin right there. You can also pin where we have marks for the placement of those appendages for like the arms. So here we go. I can line up those marks on both the body front and the body back and pin that. And again, I'm pinning so that the pin point of the pin comes out rather than the other way around where I'll have the kind of bulk of the pin sticking out the other way where it can kind of get in my way a little bit. Okay, the legs are a little tricky. They're wanting to pull out more than I want them to. So there we go. Kind of tell it who's boss, tug it back out again, line up those alignment marks and pin it again. And then over here, same thing, lining up those arm marks, lining up the leg marks. There we go. This one, tug that out. And this is part of the reason why it's just so nice to have those legs and arms basted in place, because as you can see, it would be really easy for something to slip out of position and then you end up with like a leg that's, you know, kind of attached but at a really wonky angle to the body. And then Mally's, pants might not end up fitting. So, you can have some weird effects if things start going wrong whenever you do this seams. And, the most important seams are the ones that we prepare for the most. So there we go. That is the body pinned up, ready to go. Just kind of pull these appendages up towards the center, and here's what we're going to do. Here is our stitching path. We're going to start up here on that shoulder. We're going to back stitch. We're going to stitch down around the body and then back up to the opposite shoulder and back stitch again. So that is the kind of stitching path we're going to take. So I take 3 stitches forward and 3 stitches back. Now align this nicely. All right, that looks good. And I'm just keeping those fabrics together and aligned with the edge of the foot. There we go. Looks like I'm just having a little bit of fabric bulk there, no big deal. It's stitched right out. 1 or 2 stitches off that arm. And then now we're going to look at this seam. So this curve, I want to kind of generally line that up down the curve so I can stitch that, shifting nicely. There we go. And then now I'm going into this bottom edge. This is the area where also with Miss Bunny I'd have just a little bit of bulk, just a little bit of ease. I think it was just how the fabrics, wanted to react with the dart being stitched on the back versus no dart on the front. So I just kind of smooth that out. Might need to put my finger underneath that and just smooth it out a little bit. Bringing a little fabric forward. There we go. That looks good. At any time, remember, you can stop and play with it. Like, get my hand underneath it on this angle, that's better, and smooth that out. There we go. And this is the reason why I like to pin. Might have pinned the other direction actually, but that is working out just fine. Can take them out early, or we can take them out right when we're on top of them. There we go. And sometimes I find, when I start to get frustrated, a lot of times I notice that I'm actually trying to smooth out and fiddle with more than I need to worry about at any given time. I only need to really think about a half of an inch at a time, and then as I stitch that and secure it, then the next section kind of flattens itself out. And it's really the sides up to the dart that's a little bit tricky. The base here is nice and flat. That works out really, really well. Take out that center pin. Smooth that out nicely. Stitch straight across. And yeah, then this is another reason to base the legs and arms in place, is that, if that flipped over, you could feel it. And I'm continually, kind of poking at it, feeling it, seeing what's going on. But you might not be able to, if you weren't being vigilant about it, then you might miss it and you might end up with a leg that's kind of folded over. Not the end of the world. Again, you can get really creative with your mistakes and that's just fine. But if your goal is to have nice straight legs, I really think that basting stitch is definitely worth your time. Okay, for some reason I always find that this other side of the body just goes up together a lot easier. I think it might just be the direction. You're coming from the bottom and up. I think that just goes together so much easier. The only place that you might have just a little bit of trickiness is here on the shoulder. Again, I might just be biting off more than I can chew earlier than I need to, but I'm just trying to aim to get that flat, and it's just being a little pokey. So I'm going to tug on that a little bit, tell it's who's boss. That looks good. Flatten it out. Stitch up to that pen, and then it's just a straight line across that arm. There we go. That looks great. And then we're going to finish up with a back stitch. 3 stitches back, 3 stitches forward, and break our thread. Okay, just like all the times before, I want to trim this seam down, but before I do that, I'm just going to go around and just kind of eyeball this just to make sure I didn't have any issues. And it looks like I did have an issue here on this side. I didn't catch it. You know, just like I said, sometimes you get too far ahead of yourself. You kind of speed up a little bit. I stitched a little pleat here in the side. The seam, this front pulled down a little bit, and then because it had that extra fabric and it kind of, you know, stretched a little bit, then it stitched a pleat. I'm actually going to go with it. I don't think that looks that bad, and I think it adds a little character, so I'm actually not going to rip that out. If I wanted to, how I would fix it is I would start here, and I'd probably rip down to about right here, and then I'd restitch that whole section of that seam. So if it happens to you and you want to fix it, that's what you do. You just rip out those stitches, put those fabrics back together, align them perfectly, maybe even stitch them from the opposite side so that you're looking at the right side versus the wrong side, and that can definitely help. Okay, I'm happy with it though, so I'm going to trim this seam down, just cut it in half to trim it down to 1/8 of an inch from the stitching. So carefully cutting. I am left-handed, so left-handed cutting always looks a little freaky. I know I hold my scissors at a weird angle, but you know, it's whatever is the best visible for you, however you hold your scissors, a-okay. Just want to cut right through the middle of that seam allowance to trim that down. And again, that just smooths out the seam. That just reduces bulk. Do you have to do it? No, but your finished doll, I think, will look better if you do. There we go. Not going to even worry about that little pleat. She's just got a little tuck in her side, that's all. Maybe she's been running too much. There we go. All right, so now it's time to turn Mally right side out. Very gently give a tug on her arms. Both of them, bring them out. So she's got her shoulders out. You could go on ahead and bring her head out too. There we go. And just kind of, I like to roll the fabric between my fingers like this. And that just encourages that seam to fully come out. You can actually kind of see your stitches a little bit along that edge. And you know, it's a tactile thing. I really like the feel of the fabric too. So, and that just smooths it out. Look how nicely shaped and formed that is. Same thing with the shoulders. Just give it a little roll with your fingertips. I find that, you know, when we get in a hurry, oftentimes it's easy to just like leave something, you know, kind of tucked up in there, and that's not the full expression of the doll. You know, you get a little bit more shape if you roll that back and forth. And there's a little tuck. I think it's cute. Doesn't have to be perfect, guys. It really, really doesn't. All right, so down this side, again, just roll that seam so it fully comes out. Just like so. Okay, so there we go. That is Mally all stitched together. Let's make sure that she is right. We've got hands pointing up, so she's ready to embrace the world. We've got legs pointing forward, so her toes are in the right direction. She's walking forward. Excellent. All right, so at this stage, we're going to stuff Mally. Again, I would refer to the video for Miss Bunny. You can see how I stuffed her. You stuff the doll's head and body through this opening in her back. You're going to stuff her upper arms through this opening in the bottom of the upper arm. It's just a little hole there where we did some dot-to-dot stitching. And then the backs of her upper legs will have a hole as well. So you're going to stuff each of those spaces and then stitch those spaces closed to fill that in and stop the stuffing from coming out. So I'm going to go on ahead and do that now. I'll meet you back here and we'll be ready to attach Mally's hair. So now let's give Mally a great big head full of yarn hair. And we're going to do this by creating some hair sections. We're going to sew it and then hand stitch it to the back of her head. So the yarn that I am using is Red Heart with Love, and I am using the color Mango. And this has resulted in lots of heads of hair. I have many, many dolls, and so this method works great. It's not too time consuming, and it gives her a nice big thick amount of hair on her head. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this soft tape measure and I'm going to measure out three 40-inch lengths of yarn. So I just measure to 40 inches and then I double the yarn, so I just have two pieces. I just folded that over here And then now I'm pulling that out, and as you can see, I've gotten to that point in the yarn ball where it all kind of starts to lose its insides. You just pull on it a little bit. Sometimes it gets tangled, and there it goes. So I get down to the end, fold it over again. I'm just creating 3 pieces that are 40 inches long, okay? And I'm gonna cut that, and cut that fold, there we go, and then also cut this in too. So now I have those 3 pieces. Now I'm going to tie an overhand knot. So I take the 3 pieces together and I form a loop, and you can see that the tails are going on top of the longer part of the yarn. So here we go, tails on top. Now I take the tails and go underneath and through that loop. That forms an overhand knot, looks a little bit like a pencil, and then I just tighten that down nice and even. What that's going to do is that's just going to lock those 3 pieces of yarn together so they're not going to go anywhere. Now I'm going to braid these together. This is forming the bottom or foundation of our hair pieces, and it's really nice to have a nice braid in the same color yarn that you're using for the hair so it doesn't stand out. You might potentially see this on the doll, so this is why I like to braid it with this same color of yarn. So a braid, just in case it's been a while since you braided hair or yarn or anything like that, basically you have 3 strands. The strand in the middle is the one that's getting overlapped. So you take turns, left on top, then right on top, and that's it. So you just take the strand in the middle, cross it over, you take the strand on the left, cross it over the strand in the middle, then take the strand on the right, cross it over the strand in the middle. And as you can see, the strand in the middle is what's constantly changing because you keep changing places of which strand is the middle one, and that's what creates the braid. Now, it's a little tricky to hold the braid as you are braiding, so I often will grab a ruler or something heavy to set this down. So there we go, I got a ruler and a binder, and then now I can really rock and roll. And I'm fairly quick at this. I did a lot of braiding, friendship bracelets, that kind of thing, so I can get pretty speedy with this, but basically all I'm doing is just crossing over left, right, and you can see how quick that comes together. So I'm going to keep braiding these 3 strands together, and then I will finish with an overhand knot to keep the 3 pieces of yarn from unraveling. So now let's cut out our yarn hair pieces. How I did this was I wrapped a 12-inch ruler, and I wrapped it so that I can cut on both sides and end up with hair roughly the same length. In this case, it's going to be 12-inch long yarn hair. Of course, if you want longer hair for Mally, if you want it to be, going down her back or to her butt or something like that, then you're going to want to use a bigger ruler or, like a plastic lid or something like that that's longer than 12 inches. This hair is going to result in about shoulder length blonde hair. So that just gives you a frame of reference. So as I started wrapping, I started here on the 6-inch mark, and you can see that I wrapped this hair densely, the yarn densely around and around the ruler, overlapping at times, but you can't see the ruler, unless I, really move it around. You can't see the ruler through the yarn. So I'm going to do a couple more wraps here, and as I wrap, make sure to keep this loose. You don't want to put a lot of tension on the yarn as you're going around and around the ruler, because that tension, you will actually reduce the length of the hair if it's wrapped tightly. So make sure that it's a nice loose wrap, and that looks good. So I have here from the 6-inch mark to the 1-inch mark, that leaves us 5 inches of hair, and now I'm going to cut it. So I lay that down, put a little bit of pressure here on the ruler, and I'm just going to take a pair of scissors and just slice right through all of those pieces. And I like to put my hand on top like this just to stop the hair from springing back. As you can see, it's going to spring back a little bit. It's going to end up being ever so slightly shorter, and that's just the nature of the yarn. It's always going to be moving and shifting. All right, now I'm going to cut that yarn ball off, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. I just place my hand on top of it and just gently cut along the side of that ruler. There we go. That looks good. Okay, so this might be a confusing point in the pattern because we're going to use these two different segments of hair. You can see we have now two segments of 12-inch long yarn hair. One section we're going to need is going to be 4 inches worth of hair, and then the other section is going to be 7 inches worth of hair. So what I found was really helpful was to take off about that much, maybe just a little bit more, take off about that much from the top of the ruler, what you've cut here on the top, and add that to the bottom section. And the reason is this is going to be the longer section of hair that goes across the crown of Mally's head, and that can be a little thinner. This section, we want it to be a little thicker. This is the 4-inch section. We want that to be a little thicker. That's going to go on the back of Mally's head. So as you can see, I'm not going to count. I'm not going to be really persnickety about this, but I am going to keep these two sections of yarn here divided so that I know this amount is going to be for the longer 7-inch section and this is going to be for the shorter 4-inch section. Okay, so I'm going to put this on another flat surface, maybe a binder or another ruler, and take it over to my machine along with my braid. And we're going to get started stitching this yarn hair, all of our yarn pieces together. So I'm here on my machine and I have attached a open toe satin stitch foot. This foot is special because it has a groove here on the bottom that's going to help feed all of these layers through. And I'm going to have to put a little bit of pressure here because this is a lot to go through on the machine. A walking foot could also work, also known as a dual feed foot. That would be a good option as well. Now I am using orange thread here. I would advise that you use a thread that absolutely matches your color of yarn so it blends in well, but I do want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to take that yarn braid, and the knot is right here. I'm going to set that behind the foot. If I put the knot underneath the foot, it's going to gag. Basically, the machine would not be able to feed that forward. It wouldn't go anywhere. So that's why I'm setting it so that the knot is behind the foot. Now I'm going to grab a ruler, and I'm going to basically measure from the needle to the 7-inch mark on the braid. And I'm not going to stretch this or pull on this or anything like that. I'm just going to go to the 7-inch mark on the braid, and then I'm going to place a clip, just like so. And it can be it could be a pen, it could be a clip, you could tie a knot in it, anything that you want to do. But just mark out that 7-inch mark on the braid, and then we're going to take that larger amount of yarn hair that we've cut, and you just want to smooth this out and center it. So here is, 12-inch. Let's see, well, it kind of roughly became 11-inch long yarn hair because of the tension on the ruler, right? So it's about 11 inches, so I'm just trying to eyeball this, and I'm putting the braid in the middle underneath all that yarn hair. So I'm going to smooth this out, and I do like the yarn to be roughly straight. I don't like it to be all crisscrossed or diagonal at weird angles. So I'm going to take a minute here to just smooth this out and layer it out. So basically I'm going to be stitching through a single layer of yarn and the braid. And I'm going to drop the needle down. I have a needle down button on this machine, but you could use your hand wheel if you don't have that. And I'm also going to start up here at the needle, and I'm just going to sort out this yarn and then put the foot down to put some pressure on it. So there we go. That's our starting point. And then I'm just going to smooth out this yarn. You can put your hand firmly down and then just comb it with your fingers just to smooth it out and get it nice and straight. This is looking good. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be too persnickety with it, but I do want it to be roughly centered. If you're a little worried about that, like doesn't seem centered to you, maybe it's getting a little off, you have more yarn, over here than over there, then you could always measure. Put a ruler here, find, like let's say the 5.5-inch mark, and put a piece of tape over here and put a piece of tape over here, and then that that's going to be roughly centered, and that can work too. And watch out, it's really easy to catch pieces and then they, kind of come with you and you have to get them back in position. So there we go. That looks good. All right, so what I am doing a straight stitch. I'm going to lower my stitch length to 2 millimeters. But it's probably not going to be a real 2mm stitch because it's going to be require a good bit of pressure to kind of push this through. So I started out with a few stitches and then I also back stitched, and then now I'm going to line up and get a few pieces here ready to go, and as I stitch I'm kind of pushing all that yarn right up against that foot so it feeds through. About every length of the foot, so let's say 1 inch, I'm going to stop and smooth things out, make sure things are looking good. That looks good again. I'm going to put a lot of pressure here down with my fingertips. And another thing I want to be making sure of is that braid is staying centered. So that braid is our foundation. We're basically stitching all of these yarn strands to that braid underneath. So I'm wanting to make sure that that stays centered. So this is another good reason to stop every inch or so and make sure that that's right in the middle. You could even put your thumb on that and then take a few stitches through all that yarn hair. And this does get a little bit wiggly wobbly, but it's not a big deal. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. If you stitch off the braid a little bit, it's not going to break it because we are going to stitch back across this another 2 times to get all of this yarn hair nice and locked together. So there's going to be more than one opportunity to stitch this and get it all locked together. And you really want to think about this as creating hair pieces, almost like, hair pieces that you would use in real hair, only we're going to stitch these to Mally's head. So right now we're working on the longer hair piece, the 7-inch long one, and then we're going to create a second one that's going to be 4 inches long. But the method is exactly the same. I just take the yarn and kind of stack it up, do a little bit of sorting, a little bit of combing here, kind of get it in position, nicely arranged. And sometimes, this is being really tricky on me. This is just not behaving very well. I got it a bit jumbled up between my cutting mat and the machine, so it's just, of course, it was perfectly fine the several times that I've made Mally dolls, but of course the time that I make a video, it really wants to misbehave and not go right. But that's okay. I want you to see that you can just work a few strands at a time if you need to, just to get them in position and nice and straight and centered and lined up there with that braid. That looks good. And then do a few more stitches. And it's not, we're not in a race. It doesn't have to go super, super fast. And if you get off a little bit, also don't worry about that either, because, 1 or 2 strands or even like 5 or 10 strands being a little bit off, like if I left that piece long, it's not going to be the end of the world. Like I said, we're going to give Mally a haircut in the end. so she's going to get a little haircut. And you might also find this, you can see here, I kind of miscalculated with my clip. My clip's right here and I have all this hair left to go because I was focusing so much on just kind of keeping it flat right there, right around the foot. I can take a little bit of this and use this for the other lock of hair. That's a-okay. And then I can also just allow this to be a little bit fuller through here. Let me just show you how that would work. So if you end up wanting to make fuller hair anyway, if you want just it to be a really, really big fluffy head of hair, then this is going to be more on what you're going to be doing. You're going to have a thicker layer here, not a single layer, and you're just going to need to really put some pressure down with your hands firmly as you guide that through the machine. So I'm watching out for that clip. There we go. That's lined up. And making sure that braid, now I don't want bald spots, so there we go. My foot had pushed a little bit on the yarn and I was going to get a bald spot. So I just lift the foot and put more yarn right underneath, and that worked out great. There we go. Just a few more stitches here to the end. It looks like I could use a few strands in this last section. I'm going to lift the foot, pop those few strands in place, and just stitch to and remove that clip. I don't want to run into it. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to stitch off that last strand. I'm going to back stitch. Another reason to use matching color thread is just so none of the stitching would show. Now we're going to lift the foot and rotate the hair all the way around. Okay. Rotate it all the way around, and this is what it should look like. We've got our braid And we've got our yarn hair, and look at that. Doesn't that look nice? We have that braid, and the stitching almost hides perfectly inside that braid. It really, really looks nice. And so I rotate this around, drop that foot back down again, and I'm going to stitch back across it. And I'm going to stitch back across it just about 1/8 of an inch to one side. So left or right, doesn't really matter. We're just stitching the hair to that foundation braid one more time. And I'm just guiding that through slowly and carefully. And we don't need these thread tails here, so I'm going to clip those, but don't clip the braid. We want to leave the braid exactly as it is because we don't want that fraying or unraveling right this second. There we go. I'm going to stitch to the end, and I'm going to back stitch. So it's just a backup button and forward, and then cut your thread. If you don't have a thread cutter, an automatic thread cutter in your machine, no big deal. Just slide it over and cut your threads. That's a-okay. All right, so that is our first hair piece, 7 inches long. This looks great. I know I had a little bit of a fussing. You saw me being a little persnickety with it. That's okay. It's gonna work out great no matter how it goes together. Okay, so now we're gonna take this braid. We have this nice long braided piece, and we're going to rotate it all the way around. Actually, I'm just gonna take the 7-inch piece and put it in my lap. And we're gonna take this end, and we're gonna stitch the rest of the hair to this end. So I have the other end, the overhand knot. I'm gonna do the exact same thing. I'm gonna place that underneath the foot so that the braid is centered underneath the needle. I'm gonna go on ahead and drop my needle down, bring it back up again to bring up that thread tail, just so that it's not stuck underneath and lost in the bobbin case. And I'm gonna take a few stitches here in place just to get everything locked together and working. There we go. Okay, so now I'm gonna grab those strands of hair that I have left. I was gonna put these with the other one, but they ended up not quite fitting, so here we go. We can add a little bit more fullness to this section, but I just realized we need to place our clip first. So I'm gonna measure from the needle down the length of that braid, and I'm gonna place a clip this time at the 4-inch mark. So you can see I'm measuring the needles here, and here's the 4-inch mark, and that's where I'm placing that clip. And again, you can mark that with a pen, you could tie a knot a little bit down from it, you know, anything that you want to do. The knot probably wouldn't be the most ideal because it might cause some issues with stitching your hair on. It might end up with kind of a lumpy bump in your hair. So I think something like a clip is really best. All right, so now I'm going to take that yarn, stick it underneath, and then go back to my ruler and grab the rest of my yarn that I cut. This was the smaller amount that I divided out, and I'm just going to generally smooth this out. I'm going to be a little bit less persnickety this time, right? a little less obsessive compulsive. There we go. I'm just going to get that generally in place, shove a little bit under the foot, make sure I'm centered up, make sure that braid's in the middle. This looks good. All right, let's go. I want you to see that this can be quite quick. It doesn't have to take so much time, especially when you're stitching the shorter section. And I can say, you know, you get better with this the more you do it. So if you want to start with the shorter section first, just to get a feel for it, and then do the longer section, that might be wise. But this is what we're going for here. This is exactly right. So I'm kind of keep an eye on where that clip was. Looks like my foot's pushing a little bit. If you have a walking foot, it will not push against your yarn. It will feed a little bit more evenly. But I want you to see that, yes, you absolutely can do this with just a regular zigzag or satin stitch foot. All right, did a little back stitch there. Lift that foot up, rotate that all the way around, and stitch back across your hair piece. So now we have a long hair piece and a short hair piece, a 7-inch length and a 4-inch length. So this is not hard to do. It's a few steps, obviously, but what I love about this is that, you know, with only, you know, a few lines of stitching here, we've got 2 nice big chunky pieces of yarn here ready to sew on Mally. We've got one more step of stitching. So now we should have 2 hair pieces, one 4-inch, one 7-inch, and they should be connected together on both ends of this long braid. So what I'm going to do is take this braid and fold it over the end of this 7-inch section. And I do think it's good to go on ahead and do the 7-inch section first, just simply because it's longer. So I'm going to take this long braid and I'm going to cover the lines of stitching that we've done before. Basically, this is taking the braid and sandwiching the yarn hair with the braid. So we have going to have braid on one side that's stitched and braid on the other side that's stitched too. So there we go, that looks good. And I'm going to line this up underneath the foot. And again, I'm going to hang on to that top thread, needle down, needle back up, and your bobbin thread, I find sometimes with the thread cutter, it can cut it a little short, so watch out for that. Sometimes it's even better to not use the thread cutter when you're doing something really different, something kind of weird like this, just simply so that those thread tails don't get sucked into the machine and cause you some problems. Okay, I'm going to needle down. And now the biggest thing that I want to keep in mind, this is a lot easier, this line of stitching, because of course all of our hair strands are already secured. But what we want to make sure of is that this braid stays nicely centered on top of those lines of stitching, and we want to stitch right down through the middle. So here we go, we can get started. And you may find that because it's so thick now, it's really not going to want to feed evenly. So you're going to have to put a little bit of pressure here on the hair. You might go to the back, and I like to grip that and just kind of give it a pull as it feeds through the machine. Now if it does this number on you, the hair strands going over the prongs of your foot, just lift the foot, take a second to smooth everything back out again, drop it back down again. Don't forget that, otherwise it'll immediately gag the machine if it doesn't have tension. So always make sure your foot is in the down position. There we go. If it starts getting a little bit weird, just stop, lift the foot, drop it back down again. And another thing to watch out for is that the yarn isn't getting folded over your braid on the bottom. You want to make sure that it's nice and spread out like this. And I just kind of comb my fingers through it continually, and that works out well. There we go. And, you know, just works 1-inch sections at a time. That's really plenty. And then occasionally lift your foot whenever you need to. And then don't forget, you know, don't hesitate to put a little bit of pressure on this as, you know, pull it through the machine. You've got a lot of layers here, and if you're using just a regular foot, it's going to take a little bit of effort to get it to go. There we go. Get all of that kind of crammed through the foot. Braid on top of that stitching. Drop the foot down. Last little bit there. That's good. Okay, now a little back stitch to secure it, and that section is complete. So this time I'm going to show you how to break your threads without using a thread cutter. So you have to have your foot down, lift the needle up, then lift the foot, then pull the piece away. You can see that spools out some nice long thread tails there, and then you can clip your threads close to that stitching. Because we back stitched, I know it's secure. So there we go. That is our 7-inch section. You can see how that looks on the right side. This is what I would consider to be the right side. This is going to be face up on Mally's head. And then this is the wrong side. We had 3 lines of stitching basically going through this. And it does feel quite firm. It has a really good feel to it. And none of the hair pieces are wanting to come loose. They're really firmly attached. Okay, so now we can clip this. I'm going to clip this about the same length of the braid there, about 1/2 inch or so from that end. So we have our 7-inch hair piece complete. And now the last step on your 4-inch hair piece is just to do that same step again. We're going to take that braid, make sure all of our hair is smoothed out here. You can see that braided side there. I'm going to take that and fold it over so that we are sandwiching all that hair within that foundation braid. There we go. I'm going to do the exact same thing, stitch along this braid, and then we'll move to the next step, stitching the hair to Mally's head. So now it's time to stitch these hair pieces onto Mally's head. We have the long piece that is going to be sewn on from the dot or line over here all the way around to the dot or line over here, kind of where her ears would be. The other piece, the shorter 4-inch piece, is going to be stitched down this mark along the back of her head. And I think it's easier to start there. I'm going to place my Mally doll face down, and I'm just using my cutting table here just because it kind of grips her a little bit so she doesn't shift around too much. And I am going to set the 7-inch piece of yarn here aside and just grab that 4-inch piece. And what I want to look for here is the right side. The right side is going to be the side where you just did the 1 line of stitching. The side that you did 2 lines of stitching, that was the first side that we started with, that's going to be the wrong side. So I'm going to place this wrong side down and right side up onto Mally's head and just get this shifted around so that way I have, you know, all the hair from one side of the braid. Basically I can see that bottom braid, and I'm going to line that up with that mark that's marked on the back of her head. Okay, so starting down here, you can see how I folded that braid over. Yeah, that's the side that I want to start with, and I'm going to line that up right with the seam line where her head came together. Okay, and if you want to, and the reason we made this actually a little long, this line, you might measure it and you find it's actually only about 3.5 inches long. You can actually take and fold over Mally's hair just a bit, and that adds just a little bit of fullness right at the crown. But this looks good where I've got that fold of the braid is just really nice and smooth right there. I'm actually just going to line that up right with the end of that mark on her head, right with the seam line where her 2 pieces of her head match together. All right, so I have a needle and thread. I'm using yellow thread, matches with the color of my yarn hair. I'm going to insert that needle into her forehead. Ouch! Sorry, sense of humor. And I'm going to run it through here. I do have an overhand knot tied in this thread, and if I tug on that, what it's going to do, it's going to pop through. So now that thread tail is hidden. I'm not going to tug on it so hard that it pulls through there as well. So it's locked in place nicely, and now I'm going to take 2 stitches into the end of this hair piece just to get it started. So insert, pull through, and then I'm going to take a little stitch here right across the end, just left to right, just like so. And now I'll go right to left through that yarn piece. And that is feeling just a little bit on the stiff side. You might need a thimble just to give you a little oomph to push that through. That's feeling okay, but you know, you stitch this on all day, you do a lot of these, you might need a thimble. Okay, so that's locked together. Now I'm going to change position of the hair because I've gotten that in place where I want it. Now I'm going to flip the hair forward. And I just find that this is easier to attach visually to be able to see what I'm doing and make sure that it's attaching smoothly to the head. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a stitch about an 1/8 of an inch from the last stitch, left to right. Then I'm going to go and lift that yarn hair up a bit and stitch through it right to left. So I'm going through the width of that braid. That whole thing is being attached to Mally's head. And you can see my stitch actually kind of loosened up here a little bit, so I'm going to tug on that real good, bring all of that together. I'm actually going to do a complete back stitch here, so that way everything locks together firmly and is not going to loosen up again. So I'm going to go through the fabric, just like so, tighten that down, through the yarn. There we go. Nice and locked together. Careful not to grab those strands of yarn. This is the reason why I like to do it this way, is because you've got all this furriness that is so easy for it to start, just making a mess with your yarn and just getting caught in everything. Okay, so now I'm going to go up a good 1/8 of an inch, nice length of a stitch, go across, and then go through my yarn hair. I'm just guesstimating up. Where will that line up on the yarn hair? About right there. Stitch through that and then tighten it up. And so as I go, I'm going to be slowly curling this yarn hair down the back of Mally's head. So that's how it's going to go. Now, if you wanted to go a little faster with this, if you didn't feel like it was necessary to do quite this much stitching, you know, maybe this doll is not going to get as much wear and tear, then you could do, you know, almost a straight stitch, you know, line this up and straight stitch through all the layers. I think visually this is just my favorite method of doing it, just because I can see that the braid in the center of the hair is lining up with the mark on the center of the head. And I like doing it that way. And I also like it because I can see my stitching and my thread is not getting caught by all the strands of yarn here. It's all staying kind of organized down here and it's not in my way. So I like it for all of those reasons. There we go. And then through. So I'm going to just keep stitching, as you can see, set up a good pattern here. If you are right-handed, you might like to do this another direction. You might like to be stitching through the fabric the opposite way and then, you know, through the yarn hair the opposite way. I'm finding that this works out pretty good. As you can see, I'm just switching hands with the needle. So I'm holding the needle in my left hand as I go left to right here, pull through, and then I'm holding it in my right hand as I go through this direction, and that doesn't bother me. But if that bugs you, definitely change it up, see what works best for you. I'm going to meet you back here when we get to this bottom edge. As you can see, we're going to have a little bit more hair than we need, but we're not going to cut it. I'm going to show you what we do. So in this hairpiece, I had left my braids really long. I'm now going to clip that to be short, and they can unravel, that's fine. I've also got some thread tails here, which are going a little furry, so I'm going to clip those. And of course, if your thread, you know, I used orange thread to stitch that just so you could see what I was doing. If you used matching color thread to your yarn, you would absolutely not be able to see that. Right here, as you can see, I have stitched up, so I'm about 1/2 of an inch from the end of that mark. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the hair under. What this does is this makes the entire back of the head fuller. It also makes that end a nice, you know, a nicely finished fold in that braid. So that way all of these kind of loose edges are tucked up inside. And this can actually even go a little shorter because this is going to be right up against her body, up against the back of her head. Okay, so then now as I stitch, I want to be careful to stitch through the fabric and then through both the fold and the front of the braid. So now that the stitch is going to kind of slightly change, I went through both layers of that hair. So now I'm going to go back through from front to back. So there's a complete stitch through that. Now through the fabric, just right across from left to right, and then again stabbing through the entire, all those layers. There's like 2 layers of that hair piece, just like so, and then again, it's almost a straight stitch is how that's going to feel, and then again through that layer of fabric. And you might put more stitches here than you did before, you know, in this last little space, just simply because you want that to be nice and secure, and also you're going through a lot more layers, so you might need a few more stitches. There we go. And then at the end here, as you can see, it's going to just curl right up against that marked line. And this is one of the reasons why I don't worry too much, even if I don't get my doll wet, you know, and get out those water-soluble pen marks. I'm not really worried because, as you can see, it is completely covered. You know, you're not going to be able to see those marks at all unless you really go looking for them. Okay, go right across there. And then I'm just going to take a few stitches in place, just back and forth through the fabric, then through that yarn braid. Then through the fabric, then through the yarn braid. There we go. That is how we secure that piece to the back of Mally's head. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the fabric one more time, and then I'm going to go around one more time, just kind of create a single stitch there in the fabric itself, tie an overhand knot, and then go through and travel that needle through, pull on it, that knot gets tucked into the doll itself, and then I clip off this thread tail so it's nice and long inside, so that way that's not going to come loose. Okay, now it's time to attach our longer piece of hair to the top of Mally's head. We're going to take this long piece, we're going to fold it in half and find a midpoint. So that is the midpoint, and I'm going to mark that with a pen, just like so. And then just take a look at the hair piece and decide which is the right side. I think that side looks a little bit better than the other side. I'm going to take this, so I have that kind of uglier side facing the fabric of the doll, and I'm going to line up that midpoint I just marked with the pen with this starting point of the first piece of yarn here with that 4-inch piece. So that is the center of the doll's head. You can see I've already gotten a little prepared here by having my strand of yarn here with a needle on the end. So I am ready to start stitching. I've already buried that knot, and I can just stitch right through that braid. So I'm just going from right to left there. And I am kind of contorting Mally's face quite a bit, but it's just a little easier to show you this in the shot. So that way I'm giving her a good squish, but she's okay. Now this is trickier, as you can see, because I am going to run into yarn tangles with my thread. So I need to maybe wiggle this around. I might actually reposition her completely. Let's rotate this around and see if I can get a better angle. There we go. I think that's going to work out better. So here we go. We have the midpoint of that yarn piece, and now that is stitched. I'm going to go ahead and do a back stitch here just to lock this in place. I'm going this time from right to left through the fabric. Just want to take a nice little stitch there. Pull that through. And then I'll take another stitch through that braid. And the braid, you know, it serves a lot of purposes. It helps us be able to stitch all of the yarn strands together on the machine. It also makes it easier to stitch the hair pieces to the doll. So I really think that the braid, having that foundation, you could also use ribbon, you know, you could use something wider, you could use a strip of, you know, bias binding or something like that, but I don't think that that would look as good because it would be noticeably different from the hair. By braiding the yarn together, you have something that looks like, you know, and blends in with the hair. So I think that really works best. Okay, so now that we have reinforced that and kind of doubled and tripled that stitch up, so we have our starting point. We're going to do the exact same steps that we did before. Take a little stitch. Let's go up in the fabric first. There we go. That's just the most comfortable way for me to stitch it. Pull the thread through, and I think part of the problem that I'm having a little bit here is I cut my thread too long. So watch out for that. You only really ever want to work with a piece of thread that's as long as your arm. When it gets longer than that, it just starts being more difficult to control. Just keep that in mind if ever you're having trouble and things are feeling out of control and tangly, try using a shorter piece of thread. All right, now go through that piece of yarn, through that braid, pull it through gently, and then left to right through the doll's head. There we go, and I'm just hanging onto that thread and feeding it through one stitch at a time. This is not a race. Go through one more time this way. Pull it through. And then this way. And every once in a while, I'd say maybe about, kind of guesstimate about every 1/2 inch to an inch, you know, just go all the way through again. Kind of like a back stitch, but it's really just kind of a circular stitch. We're going to go through the yarn, through the fabric on the head. That tangled up a bit, tug on it, and everything gets back around. You know, it just secures it nicely. And I do think that this hair on the head is going to get just a little bit more play. It's going to get a little bit more pulled on, a little bit more tangled, a little bit more combed through. I think this is the hair that gets more attention, so I would definitely put just a few more stitches into this longer piece. I think that's a good idea. All right, so I'm just going to keep doing this. You see the pattern of how I'm stitching it on. I go from left to right through the fabric and then from right to left through that braid, tug on it to tighten, then about 1/8 of an inch up through the fabric on the doll, then through that yarn braid. So one at a time. Let me zoom in and see if I can get you a really good close-up shot here. So here's a real close-up, just in case you've missed it, seeing exactly what I'm doing. I'm going about 1/8 of an inch up and taking a stitch that wide right across that seam in the doll's head, pull all the way through. The reason I'm pulling all the way through is just simply because that tightens up that stitch and makes it tighten up that yarn against that fabric. And then I go through the braid here, all the way through the middle of that braid, catching it nicely, and pull on that. So it's one stitch at a time, and it really is quite speedy. You know, when we attach this much hair in a hair piece all at once, it really is quite speedy, and in no time you're going to have a doll with a nice big thick head of hair. Okay, again, I'm going to near my end mark, and I want to fold over the hair so it lines up with that end mark. This piece of hair is going to be longer than you need, so that looks good as far as how much I'm going to be folding that over. So I'm going to keep this folded as I take these last stitches. I'm going to go through the body, or through the head, and then looks like this one's going to be just a regular stitch through the yarn, through one layer, and that's going to get us closer. You can just fold that back and see how it's looking. And the reason why I fold under, again, why I fold the hair under like this, is simply to make that edge look better. This is, of course, our nice folded edge where the braid came up and over the edge of the yarn, so it looks better on this end, but the other end is a bit, you know, is a bit raggedy and it doesn't look as good, and so it's just a little bit easier when you, and it looks better whenever you do that fold under, and also adds fullness here to this end. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the yarn this way, through the yarn this way, so it's front to back, back to front, then front to back, then take a little stitch through the fabric, pull that through, and then again, little stitch, insert my needle that direction, going through all the layers of the braid and the yarn hair, all of that together, little stitch like this, and then through the fabric. If you end up, you know, overlapping and going beyond that mark, does it ruin your doll? No, absolutely not. I think actually it'll look just fine. I like to, you know, try and cover that mark if I can, just simply so it's not visible. But even if you see it just a little bit, that's okay too. I would not worry about it. It might feel a little bit, yeah, that does feel just a little bit tight going through that end because it's just so many layers of yarn it's going through, so you might need a thimble just to help you push through. There we go. And then one more stitch right on that mark. You know, that was a part of the book in Mally the Maker and the Queen and the Quilt. Mally realized she was stabbing her thumb so many times she realized she needed to use a thimble at a part in the book and began using one. And I think that there's always that project that you work on and it just tears up your fingers so much that you're just like, all right, I'm determined to learn how to use that thimble, because it is, you know, it's something to get used to, and it does feel almost like a barrier and a little challenging to use at first, but once you get used to using it, it really can make a difference. Okay, that looks good. I'm just going to go around and around a few times in this spot. I go through the fold in that braid, then I go through the fabric, enough times. I've done that like 3 times now, so I think that's enough. And now again, an overhand knot. Have my little knot and then run that through. I just insert the needle again into the same spot and run that through a length and pull. That pulls the knot into her fabric and clip off that thread. Mally, you need to comb your hair. So there we go. All right, so I pull that back around and you can really start to see this taking shape, how nice that looks. Really good fullness here down the side, no bald spots, really looks good. So how do we do this other side? Basically gonna line up the doll the exact same way. You might have to finger comb that hair out just a bit. And again, what you're gonna do is just hand stitch that hair piece all the way up and around. And this is where the fold, I think, just really helps, because it just takes that little kind of messy end of the braid, you fold it up, add a little bit more fullness here to the sides of Mally's face. I think that looks good too. And you can see that's gonna line up just exactly right, fold it under about a 1/2 inch, and then that's gonna result in hitting that mark just exactly right. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing, stitching through her hair, stitching through her fabric right along that seam line all the way to that mark, back stitch, and Mally's hair will be fully attached and complete. So there we go. That is how you are going to sew your Mally doll and give her a beautiful head full of yarn hair. Now this doll in particular, I unkinked her hair. So her hair was like a 4 or 5 ply yarn, and I just sat watching some movies and untwisted each piece of yarn hair, which took a lot of time, I gotta say, but I really like this effect because it made her hair a lot more full, and it really stands out nicely. Like, look at the back, that just really looks good. Full head of hair, no bald spots. And then I just gave it a trim with a pair of scissors to get it to the length that's described in the book, which is shoulder length hair. But of course, you can absolutely expand on the book. You don't have to make a Mally doll identical to the way she was described. This one in particular, I turned her hair into a ponytail. You can see I left it long. Probably needs a little bit of a trim just to even up all of those layers. Of course, if you want super, super long yarn hair, cut the yarn pieces longer. You'll need to use a bigger ruler when you're wrapping the yarn to cut it, maybe a 16-inch ruler, and then you'll probably end up hair down past her butt, which is always my goal, to grow my own hair that long, but it never works out right? So yes, you can absolutely go with longer hair. Shorter hair, like if you wanted to make a boy doll, you might end up having to hand sew more pieces on the back here. So we did that center piece, we did the crown piece. What I would advise if you want to make a boy doll and cut the hair super short would be to maybe do 2 more lines of hair, hand stitching those to the back. So you'll need more yarn, you'll need more hair pieces to attach. And I think that will work okay. Experiment with it, see what works best for you. I love how this came out. And of course, Mally's looking kind of naked right this second. So in the next video, we're going to make her a t-shirt, and then we're going to make her pants with real working pockets. So I hope that you will join me for these other tutorials. This is an intermediate sewing pattern. This is going to be something that's going to really crank up your sewing skills. So definitely join in the fun. Find your pattern for Mally the Maker at mallythemaker.com/doll. Until next time, let's go quilt.